she was going to call immigration on me and tell them that my wedding was fake and all this shit. She's insane. Welcome back to this week's episode of 10 Hours from Home. I am coming to you this week looking like a shaggy dog. I love my hairdresser. She is the best in the whole world. But I stupidly told her to give me bangs, and we spoke about this last week, but I highly regret that decision because, one, it's hot in Paris, humid as hell. It's just too hot, and there's no air conditioning in Paris except for in the stores, or I've been in pretty fancy apartments here and there still have never been air conditioning. So it's like San Francisco, but the thing about San Francisco is that it's never this hot. Paris gets hot every year and humid, crazy humid. And then you're in a city. San Francisco's near the beach. So anything that's near the ocean or near water is always like Casablanca. It can be 80 degrees with 80% humidity during the day, but you have the ocean. And then at night, like, you get a respite. In Paris, because you're surrounded by buildings, it's just hot. Anyway, so bangs plus heat, plus I was already tired of having hair in my face because my hair was so long. Not a great combination, even though my hair looks amazing. So thanks, Rhiannon. And I will never not go to her, but this was my self-inflicted bullshit. And here we are. So anyway, this week I am in Paris for just this last week. And then next week on Sunday, actually, I am going to be heading to Morocco, which I'm very excited about. I'm very excited to see my friends and my Moroccan family. And the other thing about this week that's just been tiring is that I've been riding the Vilib all over the city, probably 26 kilometers a day. So whatever that is in miles. Be by the beach for a minute, just kind of have a moment to relax and enjoy, and looking for an apartment. Like, I found one that I really, really love, but I keep having these panic attacks about living in 30 square meters again. I don't know how I feel about it, to be honest, because I'm just so used to the luxury of not living in 30 square meters that I just keep thinking, what does it look like to live in 30 square meters again? So anyway, I found one that I really like. We'll see what happens. And I don't know, maybe I'll get the balls to actually put in an offer this week. I have a lot of questions that I sent to this guy, the real estate agent. So we'll see what he says, and we'll see if there's wiggle room in the price, because it's kind of overpriced at the moment. And yeah, go from there. I'll keep you posted. See if I get the guts to actually do this, make this dive. All right. And on that note, this week we're actually talking about when you land, when you get here, you have your culture shock moments. And part of that is finding an apartment, finding a place to live, and not killing people in the process. And setting up your bank account. So two vital functions of life: having money and having a roof over your head. And this will probably speak more to France, because France is just so freaking complicated. I was having dinner with someone the other night who told me that it's so funny because, like, French people find the most complicated route of doing something, and then they take that route rather than, what takes a normal person, I don't know, couple minutes to do, it'll take them hours. And it's honestly pretty true. And again, it speaks to the education situation. They're just taught that way to make things more complicated because it's very artistic and it's more beautiful and all that. Most of the world is about efficiency. Anyway, so this will probably focus a little bit more on France. So if you are interested in living in Paris or in France, then this is a small peek into what it entails to rent a home here. Finding an apartment, I will say in Spain it was fairly easy, like, especially as a student. I just went through an agency. My mom was my co-signer, and they didn't really ask many questions. Like, they didn't ask for my bank account information. I don't remember them asking for like any proof of income or anything like that, which is pretty similar to how it went down in Morocco. Morocco was even easier, to be honest. So I went through an agency. They basically asked me what I needed and what my budget was, and then proposed me like 2 apartments, 3 apartments. And I went to visit one that was in my price range, and it was disgusting. but I really loved the terrace, so I got the terrace. And yeah, it was just the best apartment ever. And as long as I paid my rent on time, I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't paid my rent on time. They asked for my mom as a co-signer, filled out an application. I paid them every month, and that was that. In Morocco, it was pretty similar. My friend who was living there helped me to find a place. I found the places on my own, but he went and looked at everything for me to make sure that they were actually, legit and for rent, and for rent from the people that they were rented by on the sites. And I actually just reached out to a real estate agent on Facebook, and he sent me a list of things in my price range, and I found one that I really loved that was unfurnished. And a few days before I got there, I wired him the money to buy me a mattress. I wired him the money to give half of the deposit to the owner of the apartment. And then as soon as I got there the next day, this man was so nice. I gave him half of the deposit and no rent, right? He was so nice because I said, can I finalize everything when I arrive? And he was like, oh yeah, no problem. So I spent the first night in this apartment. The real estate agent came the next morning, and I actually was sleeping because I was dead tired. And he invited me to coffee with his friends, introduced me to all these people. And it was really a lovely experience. I paid him the rest of the money, and then him and I were friendly because he lived in the neighborhood. It was a really nice experience, to be honest, and really easy and really seamless. And thanks a lot to my friend because he made it that way. He's a Virgo. And if you guys know anything about astrology, I think that speaks for itself. But he's a Virgo man. And thank God I had him in Morocco, because my Piscean nature probably would have gotten screwed many a time had it not been for him. But he made me hyper aware of just being very detail oriented when it came to literally everything, to be honest, but especially to that kind of stuff. So that's Morocco and France. Really seamless, especially now you can use Facebook to kind of find your way, and just be sure to double check and make sure things are legit, and go through an agency if that makes you feel more comfortable. And if not, just double check. So France. France, let's see. How can I explain France? Well, first of all, when I moved here originally, my friend was telling me, oh, come. You can live with me and my roommate, and everything will be great, and we'll find a bigger place, and all three of us will live together. And at the time, that seemed like a great idea because her roommate and I got along. The thing is that her roommate was a psychopath, like most of her other friends. I have one other friend that I've met through her who I love dearly, and you will hear from later in this podcast. But beyond that, all of her friends are pretty much psychopaths. How do I explain this? So I get to Paris. My mom is here. We started in Barcelona because I was living in Barcelona at the time. All of my stuff was there at a friend's house for the summer. Because I was moving to Paris, I had left my apartment. My friend agreed to watch all my stuff. My mom and I were flying, and I actually was on a different flight than my mom. Never take Iberia. Iberia is the worst freaking airline. They are so rude. They are so unprofessional, and they cancel so many of their flights. It is absurd. Got on my flight, got to Miami. Miami was like my layover spot, and then the flight's canceled. For no apparent reason, not for weather, not for mechanical issues. Come to find out from overhearing a conversation from the flight attendants, the pilot was drunk and so he couldn't fly, which thankfully they didn't just continue the flight, right? But so don't fly Iberia. That's one thing I will tell you. I would never fly Iberia again. But anyway, I stick with Air France. Air France all the way, all the time. I actually just got my upgraded frequent flyer miles. So that's one thing I will say. Travel tip right there is, if you frequently fly back and forth, I highly recommend you stick with one company and you fly with that company, even if it's a little bit more expensive. I will never not say to take Air France. I love Air France KLM. They are the best airline. You get the best service. You get just so many perks to flying with them, and I just love them, to be honest. I fly with them pretty much anywhere I go, as long as it's not within the United States, because obviously they don't operate just local flights in the United States. But I highly recommend that whatever your airline of preference is, if you are doing this and you want to travel a lot and all of that, it is definitely worth signing up for their whatever airline's frequent flyer program, because it has so many perks in the long run if you're really flying. So that is a travel tip. Stick with one airline, or even just like 2 airlines or within the family of airlines, and use them. Anyway, my poor mom has like the responsibility of getting all of my crap from Barcelona, driving around Barcelona, which my mom doesn't even like to drive in San Francisco, in a city that she knows pretty well. She doesn't like driving downtown. She hates driving with one-way streets and a lot of stuff going on. And Barcelona is a very confusing city to drive in because of the way that it's constructed. There's a one-way street. It's not on a grid. There wasn't GPS at the time like there is now. Like, she couldn't just use Google Maps and like go to wherever she was going. She went and got all my stuff, and we stayed in like this, not hostel, but pretty close to hostel in Barcelona for one night. And then I was jet lagged, so I got the bright idea that we should just leave because I was awake when I arrived. And so we got all my stuff. We packed it up in this rental car that we had that literally was so full of crap that the mannequin was in the seat between the two of us, and I had to rest my arm on on my mannequin, my dummy for school. We did have GPS in terms of in the car, the old school GPS, but we didn't have GPS like on our phones or like Google Maps or whatever. And so I took us the longest route possible from France to Spain. I don't know how I did it, but bless her heart. And then I fell asleep right away. I fell asleep in the passenger seat, of course. So my poor mom is driving to Paris the middle of the night through the Pyrenees with all of my shit in the back. And so we finally get to Paris. I'm thinking I'm moving in with my friend and her roommate. And the Friday of my orientation, I was deathly ill. Like, I was super sick. It was the Friday of my orientation. I went to my orientation, felt like I was going to die. And then I get a phone call from my friend saying, well, my roommate really doesn't want to move, so you're welcome to stay here as long as you need, but she doesn't want to move and she doesn't want you to live with us. Now, for some context, this person, this roommate, was and always has been incredibly jealous. She stopped talking to my friend because my friend made a plan to come and see me for Christmas one time instead of going to see her, and then ended up not coming to see me because this person threw so much of a temper tantrum that it wasn't worth it to deal with it. This person also threatened when my friend decided that she wanted to come to the US and like go to Disneyland for Christmas and all that. Her roommate, her ex-roommate now, decided that she was going to call immigration on me and tell them that my wedding was fake and all this shit. She's insane. So in the long term, it was a blessing in disguise, but yeah, she was crazy as shit. And so I'm happy that I didn't end up living with them. But my mom was leaving on Monday and it was Friday, and the apartment that we were renting wasn't available, so I couldn't stay in that apartment either. So I'm deathly ill. I'm fine, and now I'm deathly ill, and now I have to find a new place to live in 2 days in France. It took my friend, this is the one I met in the hostel, it took her a month and a half to find an apartment in Paris. So to find an apartment in a weekend is insane. Thankfully, whatever ethereal being is up there was looking out for me, and I was able to find an apartment quickly. I was able to move in quickly. And the landlord was fairly chill and easy to deal with. She was renting it out herself, so she wasn't going through an agency, which if you do go through an agency in Paris, it's much more expensive. You have to pay agency fees, and it's just a much more complicated process. This woman, I found her because at the time, my boyfriend, who then became my husband, who now is my ex-husband, showed me a website that was just for, particulars, which is, I don't know how to explain it in English, but, you have a professional website for an agency, and then you have a Craigslist of sorts, but it's not a Craigslist. It's specifically for real estate. So he showed me this website. I found this apartment, and She was really open to renting it to me. And my mom was with me, thankfully, because I think that made a huge difference as well. And so my mom was able to give her all of her pay stubs and be my guarantor and all that good stuff. So I found this apartment on Saturday. My mom and I were sitting in the McDonald's all of Friday day, found this apartment on Saturday, like rented it Saturday immediately and had the keys by Sunday and moved everything in by Sunday. And then my mom left on Monday. So it was a bit of a shit show. But in that respect, I was super lucky. Normally, what needs to happen in order to get your apartment in Paris specifically is you submit a folder of your information to an agency that's usually listing it, or even the owner who's listing it privately. And their expectation is that your income is 3 times the amount of the rent. So if your rent is 800 euros, they expect you to make 2,400 euros as a student who can only work 20 hours a week. So that's the expectation. If it's 1,000, then you need to make 3,000. If it's 1,500, and so on and so on. So on top of that, you also need a guarantor. Even if you do make 7 times the rent or 8 times the rent, you need somebody that'll guarantee that, like a cosigner, that if you don't pay the rent, that you will. And in some cases, they expect that you put into an account 3 to 6 months worth of rent. That is not a deposit. So this is on top of your deposit, and it's a special account that neither person can touch unless you don't pay your rent and they take you to the tribunal. Or to the court. It's a very expensive process, and there's a lot of ways around it because of this owner to renter situation, but it is a very, 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 very painstakingly long process of going through the motions of trying to get an apartment. And especially with an agency, generally there are about 10 to 15 applications that these owners get, and they usually take the one that looks the best. And if yours doesn't look the best, you have a long road ahead of you. The other conundrum of this is that when you're first arriving in Paris, in order to have an apartment, you need a bank account. But in order to have a bank account, you need an apartment. Or you need a place to be able to prove that you live there, which is called an attestation d'habitation. So you need something like an electrical bill or a note from the landlord, or if you're staying with someone, you need something that says like, yes, this person is staying here, in order to open a bank account, which is just insane because you can't have an apartment without a bank account, and you can't have a bank account without the apartment. And again, this is where I got really lucky in the beginning because I didn't have a bank account, so I had to open a bank account. And thankfully, I was able to use my friend's address in order to do that because she was like, okay, yeah, no problem. Like, use the address to say that you live here and open your bank account. So that's a little bit of how convoluted it is in Paris to get an apartment. And there's other things, like you obviously have to get renter's insurance, and you have to do a walkthrough, and when you leave a walkthrough, and there's just a lot of paperwork involved, and it's just a little bit of an insane process. And all of that is because living in France, it's a very socialist country, and there's a lot of protection for renters. So once you're in the apartment, it's really hard to get you out of the apartment, and especially if it's wintertime. So for example, if you rent an apartment and you stop paying your rent in October, they can't kick you out until it's warm again in April. So as an owner, you could lose out on that much rent. Obviously, you can go back and try to sue someone for it like you would in the US or anywhere else in the world. You start the eviction process. But during the cold months, you actually cannot kick anybody out of their apartment during the cold months. So it's a really long, painstakingly expensive process to get a renter out of the apartment if they haven't paid, unless it's the summer, and then it's fairly quick. It's like 2 months. But so they do all of these things to make sure that they're going to get someone who is paying on time and, has a steady job, because that's the other thing. Like, if you're not a student, you need a CDI contract. You cannot get an apartment as a freelancer. You cannot get an apartment as a CDD, which is contract with an end date. You have to have a permanent contract, because then they know that you have stable employment and it's really hard to fire you, just almost equally, probably harder to fire you than it is to throw you out of the apartment. Those are the issues that arise when it comes to finding an apartment, why it's so difficult, and kind of how people are protecting themselves. So it's understandable, even if it is frustrating. And I just would caution you that if you are looking to move to France, that just be aware of that. Just be aware of the fact that that is probably a hurdle that you're going to have to deal with. And a lot of times, if you stay at a hostel or something like that, you can use the address. You can ask for a piece of paper that says, yes, this person's staying here, in order to open your bank account and all of that stuff. But it's just, it's kind of entertaining. I can have a bank account, but I can't. It's the same thing for a job. In order to have a job, you have to have a bank account. But in a lot of times, also, I just want to mention too that when you're a student in France, the other benefit of socialism is that you get a stipend for your apartment. So you get like 200 euros and some change to go towards your rent. So whatever your rent is when you're a student, you get what you go to a place that's called the CAF. You sign up for it and you can get 200 euros to go towards your rent, or, I mean, it just goes into your bank account every month, but it's to help you as a student. And that's for any nationality and anybody, as long as you're a student. So whether you're French or you're American or you're Spanish or you're Moroccan or you're Chinese, like, you can get this money. And there are other, like, the CAF office is a place that you can go and get, assistance for other things, but those are only specifically for French people. But when you're a student, you can get that 200 and whatever euros. It depends on where you live and the amount of rent that you pay. And it's like an assistance that helps you every month. So my rent was only like 400 and something euros every month because of the help of the RSA. So it was really nice. Always take advantage of those social programs that exist, because at one point, if you do end up staying here, you are going to be paying for them. It's important to use those resources wisely and get the help that you need. And especially as a student, it makes life a lot easier. It's just a lot of administration, a lot of socialism, and a lot of protections for everybody involved. So best of luck trying to find an apartment in Paris. Just a lot of people who want to live here too, to be honest. Like, it's a lot of people, it's a lot of competition for an apartment. There's a lot of interest to live in this city between the foreigners who want to live here for work and the French people who want to live here for work, and then the people who want to live here just to live here because it's Paris and all of that stuff. It's quite the experience to look for an apartment. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, the easiest way to go about it is to go directly to the owner who's managing their own property, because a lot of times when you go through the agencies, one, you have to pay a fee for them to bring you to the owner, which is just ridiculous. And two, it's just a way more complicated process. And when I've never actually done the agency, but I have friends who have gone through the agencies to do their stuff, and it takes way longer. I just go directly to the owners and, give them all the paperwork that they need that sometimes maybe is a little bit embellished or that isn't up to snuff, let's say. But it looks beautiful, and I look like a very important candidate. And also the other important thing about that is I've never not paid my rent. So even if I have embellished maybe my salary a time or two, I have always paid my rent. That being said, opening a bank account in France is also really difficult. As an American, specifically, when you are an American, a lot of banks will not accept you because the FBI likes to monitor your accounts, which is lovely and special. And it's supposed to be for those rich people who, put all their money in the Cayman Islands and then screw over the poor people and Bernie Madoffs of the world, which we all know that they get away with it. But in fact, it's pretty much just Big Brother always watching and making sure that you pay your taxes. The U.S. is one of two places in the world, the U.S. and Eritrea, which is a war-torn country in Africa that's kind of near Ethiopia and all of that tax their citizens even when they're not living in the country. So here's an example. A friend of mine works in Italy once every 2 weeks. He has to go for fittings and manufacturer meetings and all of this stuff. So the days that he works in Italy, he's not taxed on his salary in France. Even though he works for a French company, he lives in France full time. Any day that he goes to Italy, he's not taxed in France. He's not taxed in Italy either. He just doesn't apparently have to pay taxes on that money. The US is not like that. Once you make a certain amount of money, which is $97,900 and something dollars a year, you have to pay taxes in both countries no matter where you are. So if you're living in France, you have to pay your taxes in France because obviously you're using the resources of that country. If you are living in France and you're a US citizen, you have to pay taxes in the US as well on the money that you're making over that amount of money. So if I'm making $150,000 a year, I have to pay taxes on the supplemental, 60 whatever $1,000 it is. Isn't that just lovely? So us and your US and Eritrea are the two countries that make you do that. Don't get it. I don't get it. So when I first learned that, I was going to renounce my citizenship, get my French citizenship, renounce my American citizenship, and just screw them. But then I learned that you also have to pay to renounce your citizenship. So, and then you're liable for taxes for the next 10 years, even if you're not a citizen. So the whole thing makes me crazy. But because of that, the US monitors your bank accounts no matter where you are in the world. So when I'm in Morocco, the US monitors my bank account in Morocco to make sure I'm not making, $170 million and hiding it in Morocco for them to not pay to then not pay taxes on it. Which damn good and well, if I had $170 million in Morocco, they would be like, it's no big deal. Like the Moroccans say, Mashi mushkil, like the US would be like, oh, it's fine. I'd have some accountant that could find some loophole to screw the taxpayers of the US over and make me more money. But the middle class people get to have difficulties finding a bank account because the FBI monitors it, and you have to literally sign a piece of paper and put your social security number on it and sign and say, okay, yes, I understand that the FBI is going to be monitoring my account and I give permission not give permission, but I understand that this is happening and that if I commit fraud or if I, falsify my taxes or whatever, then I will be imprisoned and taxed and all this crap. That's always fun. And because of that, it's really hard to find a bank that will open a bank account for you. So usually it involves shitty banks. I had HSBC when I first moved here and they actually didn't ask me for that. I didn't have this problem in Spain either. So I think it was something that came later in my life abroad because I would say about 6 years ago was the first time I had to sign this piece of paper. And the only bank that would accept me was Bread. I went to 7 different banks and asked, and they were like, no, sorry, we don't take Americans on our branch. Okay, cool. And I have a friend actually who works for a bank here and he's like, yeah, no, we don't accept Americans because we don't want the FBI in our business. I wouldn't either. So thanks to the US for fucking it up for us as always, but just something to be mindful of. If you are American, that is a hurdle that you will have to deal with in opening a bank account. A lot of the time here, for example, you can open one in La Poste, which is the post office. You can open one in Bread. And if you make a lot of money and you can bribe someone or flirt with someone, you can open some in somewhere else. But in general, those are the only 2 that I've ever heard of accepting Americans, which this is going to be interesting too for buying an apartment, but we'll see. So there's that. And that existed too in Morocco as well. As an American in Morocco, it was really hard to find a bank account as well. So I ended up going with, I couldn't go with the bigger branches like BMCE because they're connected to French banks, or Crédit Maroc, couldn't go with them. I tried BNP Paribas, which is a French bank that exists kind of everywhere, couldn't go with them. So I ended up going with Attijari Wafa. So if you go to Morocco and you're American, Attijari Wafa will welcome you with open arms. And they're a great bank. I really appreciated my bank account manager and everything that she did. She was the bomb. But anyway, so it is definitely a hurdle that you have to be aware of when opening a bank account in a foreign country. I only have the experience with those 2 countries, but I can imagine that this is probably something that exists across the world when you're living abroad and is definitely something people don't want to deal with. So banking in France is a little bit different, and in Spain and in Morocco. In Spain and Morocco, basically, when you're out of money in your bank account, you don't get any more. You don't have overdraft fees, but you also don't have a credit amount. If you have, for example, in Spain, if you have $31.32 in your bank account and what you want is $31.33, you're going to be rejected for that transaction. And that's just how it is. No money, no honey. If you're in Morocco and the same thing, you have $41.75 and it's $41.78, you're not getting that thing. You're going to get declined for the charge. I like it, honestly, to be perfectly honest. I don't have the ability to rack up a bunch of fees and all this crap like you do in the US. I recently dealt with Bank of America, which is the bane of my existence, and they actually charged $60 in fees for transferring money from one Bank of America account to the next Bank of America account. And then there were like 2 overdrafts that shouldn't have been happening because the account was frozen. And when an account is frozen, that means that nothing should go in and out of it. So there should be no fees. Anyway, never get Bank of America. Literally the worst customer service, worst bank, worst everything in the world. So if you're doing the other way, if you're coming from France and you're going to the US, do not use Bank of America. Capital One 360, the best bank in the world. They have the best freaking customer service, no foreign transaction fees, no overdraft fees. They're amazing. I highly recommend them. Go to them. But Bank of America is the bane of my existence. And they are ridiculously expensive for no reason. They offer nothing. Anyway, small little rant. So that's how banking in Morocco and Spain worked from my point of view. I'm not really sure if that's, as a foreigner opening an account or a blanket statement over everyone of like, if you don't have it, you can't have anymore. In France, the way that it works is you go into the bank, they ask you how much you make a month, and then they offer you a credit, the line of credit. I went into my bank most recently, opened up a new bank account, and they offered me a line of credit of 1,000 euros. Now, I have been to bank jail before, as I affectionately call it, one time, and I will explain what that is, but I have been to bank jail before, and I said, absolutely not. I do not want 1,000 extra euros to get myself into a hole, and then if I can't dig myself out of this hole, then I'm screwed and I have to go to bank jail. No, not happening. So I had them lower it to like 500 euros, I think, or 250. I can't even remember, to be honest, because I never want to go back to bank jail. And so I never overdraft my account anymore. But basically what it means is that you have 1,000 euros until your bank starts rejecting payments. But this amount of money is charged an interest fee. So it's not like an overdraft fee, but let's say you're overdrawn 100 euros. They're going to charge you 10 euros a month for every month you're overdrawn 100 euros. So it's a fairly steep fee. And that's just kind of the price of borrowing the money. So if I have a paycheck of 5,000 euros, I can spend 6,000 euros that month, but I don't want to. So that's kind of how it works in France. And then what happens is how I ended up in bank jail was I had something happen that we'll talk about in a later episode for sure with my ex and my mom, and like kind of like the whole world started crashing in on me. So there was kind of like this family emergency and I had to leave Paris for 2 or 3 months. And there was a bill that came out of my account that I didn't expect, and I wasn't paying attention to anything going on in my French account because I had left plenty of money in there. So it was like taken care of. And then there was a bill for taxes that I hadn't expected that came out that overdrafted my account by like 200 euros or something. And because I hadn't touched it in a couple months, they assumed that I left the country and that I was just going to steal this money from them. And they turned me over to the Bank of France. And when you go to the Bank of France, they basically, you have this special place that you get a new card that's got no raised numbers on it at all. So you get this like little rinky dink, you're a baby and don't know how to use money card. And then anytime you want to take money out of your account, you have to call a number and say, like, I'd like to withdraw 500 euros from my account. And then you have to go into the bank and ask them for the money. and then you don't get any credit and you don't get any of this. And so once you're in bank jail, you're in there for 2 freaking years. You have to prove for yourself for 2 years to say, oh, I'm a upstanding citizen and I swear I'm going to behave and I won't do anything bad, I promise. And it is a nightmare. And you can get into this for writing bad checks writing bad checks in France or Morocco will land you in jail. But like, let's say you have one check that bounces, you're going to bank jail immediately. So it's the Bank of France. They take control of your account and then you have to basically ask for any of your money. Like, please, please, please. And God help, like if you lose your card, God help you if you lose your card because, or if it gets frozen all the time. So if your card gets frozen and you have to call this special number, you can only call between 8 a.m. and 12 p.m. Monday through Friday. So if you have an emergency on the weekend or your card is stolen on a Saturday, you're screwed until Monday. It's just a nightmare. So avoid bank jail at all costs. And if you can't be trusted with 1,000 euros of credit, don't freaking take 1,000 euros of credit. You can tell them, no, I don't want 1,000 euros of credit. Just give me 150 or, whatever, like whatever you feel is manageable. Then do that because bank jail is a nightmare. You will be in it for 2 years. So I was a good girl for 2 years. I did my 2 years and I asked to be taken out of bank jail and it took another year to get me out of bank jail. Like it was just ridiculous. So anyway, highly recommend that you set your credit line at a reasonable amount when you are dealing with France because otherwise you'll be in the Bank of France's database as a bad money manager and you will never be out of it. No, but it's overwhelming and it's an extra step and an extra layer of an already complicated system that you don't need to add to your daily life because it'll make you insane. I can tell you that from experience. But thankfully now I'm out and free and happy to live my life and use my contactless pay and have an adult card with raised numbers. Like a real grown-up. Anyway, that's what I have for you today. I hope that you find it helpful. Good luck finding an apartment in Paris and in France in general, wherever you're choosing to live in France, because it will be a little bit of a challenge. And if you go through an agency, even more of a challenge. And just kind of be aware of those things. Again, give yourself grace. Cry on the kitchen floor if you need to, or the hotel bathroom floor, wherever you're crying, feel free to cry. We all cry. And if you need Wi-Fi, always, McDonald's has great Wi-Fi. I will say that's how I found my apartment in Paris because the place that we were staying did not have Wi-Fi. So if you ever need some Wi-Fi, McDonald's is the place to go. It's free. You can sit there. It's not a big deal. And use the Wi-Fi if you need to find an apartment in a day and a half. So anyway, I hope you all enjoyed this episode and I hope that you have some useful information to make your living abroad situation much easier. And I will talk to you next week when we talk about how to get around town and, navigating the new city that you're living in. Transport, all that good stuff. Driving abroad, oh my God, terrifying. Let me tell you some stories, and I definitely will. So we will get into all of that next week, and I wish you a very great week this week. Have a good one. And as always, this podcast would not be possible without my dear friend Jewel, who is a sound engineer. And she makes me sound like I'm a pro and like I know what I'm doing when it comes to sound. It has been much trial and error, but thanks to her, she has made it happen. So you can find her on Instagram at Jewel, Jewel, Remeta, Remeta. And she does sound engineering and she's incredible at it, and she does Reiki and healing, so you can reach out to her for either of those things. And the other amazing woman that I have to thank for this and for keeping me on track and doing all the good things for this podcast to help it grow is Nuhaila, who is the owner of a branding agency called Branda Blanca, and you can find her at Branda Blanca on Instagram, BrandABlancaa on Instagram. and brandablanca.com. And she just does some amazing stuff in terms of social media, branding, content. And honestly, she just keeps me on time. She keeps me sane. She makes sure everything gets done. The only reason that things get done is because of Nuhaila, thankfully. So if you're interested in her services, definitely reach out to her. And again, thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.